From interstate travel to shipping pills, today we're unpacking the real-world impacts of abortion legislation across the states. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number. This is part 2 of our episode about America's patchwork of abortion legislation. Stephen, ready to dive into things?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a complicated issue. I mean, as we said, it's not simply about should abortion be legal or not. There are all sorts of different nuances to it and shades of different types of laws that you can have. So let's start with procedural or surgical abortion bans. So first of all, what does that mean? And where are we seeing these most intense restrictions?
Yeah, so a procedural or surgical abortion is what a lot of people just think of as an abortion. So it's one that's done in a doctor's office. It's medically done. It's usually not done by abortion pills, which are another big topic of conversation right now. But it's one where you have to go into the clinic and a doctor is performing a procedure that is the abortion. And we're seeing a lot of really intense restrictions around these. And especially kind of in the South and Midwest, a lot of states over there have enacted almost near total bans. If you take like Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, Missouri, they've all banned almost all abortions, except for with a few exceptions. And this is kind of, again, one of those places that we get into the nitty gritty of these laws, how it's not just a black and white, yes, no kind of thing. And so there's abortions where there's an exemption for the risk of the mother. So if there is a problem with the fetus, if it's sick, if it's already died, there's a lot of things that can happen to a pregnant person that can cause a huge risk to their life. And so there's some states that will allow abortion in that sense. There's also other types of exceptions in cases of rape or incest. But again, we get into these different states where they make kind of different processes. Like if you want to have an abortion in the case of a rape, it has to have been reported already, or even with incest. And a lot of rape and incest abortions are actually kind of from the same instance. And so those are a lot of issues that can be difficult to be reporting if, you know, you're a 12-year-old girl, and other things like that. So they really are some of the strictest bans in the world and definitely in the country.
And then, of course, there are what they call the heartbeat bills, right? So what are these? They're 6-week bans, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Georgia and South Carolina have these kinds of bans in place. And what they are is an abortion after you can detect a heartbeat. But this is kind of something that's really disagreed on in the medical community. Most doctors say it's actually just kind of electricity that they're being able to detect. And that does eventually turn into a heartbeat. But these bans at 6 weeks are often before many women even know they're pregnant, just because of the way pregnancy is measured and how periods work. You usually don't know that you're pregnant until a 6-week mark because it's a month delayed and all this other stuff. But yeah, these restrictions also just have a huge impact on people because they mean that you need really quick access. You need it to be, you know, pretty easy to get. And they really raise the stakes for both doctors and patients.
Absolutely. The practicalities matter here. It takes time for a woman to make a decision, to actually go to a clinic, to go through all the necessary steps. As you say, she might have to travel a long distance. Maybe she needs to try and somehow raise the money to actually pay for it. And all of that within a 6-week period when you probably don't even know you're pregnant anyway. It makes it incredibly impractical. So other states then have what's known as a gestational limit ban. So this is like Florida, which has a 15-week limit, right? Which is interesting because even states with some access limits are sort of tightening those. So Florida recently passed a 6-week ban to replace this 15-week law from last year. And I know Arizona, we mentioned this earlier, has also repealed that 1864 law, only to see another wave of restrictions in its place. So what's going on here? Why have we got all these mixed approaches?
Yeah, that's right. There's states revisiting all of their laws. And, you know, Arizona's law quite literally was from the Civil War era. So that ban just really doesn't reflect the legislative climate today, our priorities, the world that we live in. And it was only allowed because of a Supreme Court decision that kind of reverted the state back to this law. And so, again, that comes with a lot of these trigger bans. After Roe v. Wade, when that was taken down, all of these old laws that were on the books took into effect. And so a lot of what we're seeing is states finally kind of passing legislation that either changes the trigger laws that they had. In the cases of Florida, we're seeing them really make it more restrictive. With Arizona, it's pretty interesting. They've been a huge topic of conversation this year. They have a liberal governor. And in May, they actually passed a new law that officially repealed that 1864 Act and they have a 20-week ban back on the books. But there's a ballot initiative happening right now getting voted on that seeks to codify the protection of abortion and some other things going on there. So we're seeing a lot of stuff happening where states are kind of trying to finally figure out what's going on with Roe v. Wade getting overturned and these laws that have been on the books for years, and a lot of the impacts of them of people dying and other things, just because they really don't match the world that we live in.
So, of course, that's one side of the argument. On the other side, of course, of this divide, you've got states that are actually trying to protect abortion rights and are bringing in laws and amending constitutions and so on, and even creating these what are called sanctuary laws for providers. So what's that?
Right. States like California, New York, Illinois all have enacted laws that protect abortion rights and shield providers who offer care to out-of-state residents. And these are kind of these sanctuary states that ensure anyone seeking abortion access can safely get that care, and that providers won't face legal consequences for providing that care to people. And it's a really proactive response to a lot of what we're seeing as results of these kinds of bills being on the books, or these old laws being on the books, to help those who are unable to get care in their home state due to these strict laws, but intense need to get the health care.
Indeed. It's an interesting other element to this, really. So the argument is often portrayed as it's a states' rights issue. So therefore, states should get to decide. And that's a reasonable argument. But what about then if people who live in one state travel to another state for abortion? Should you try and stop them doing that? Because surely, if you believe that people who live in Kansas shouldn't have an abortion, surely people who live in Kansas shouldn't be able to travel somewhere else to get an abortion. But then you're interfering with all sorts of other rights as well, like the right freedom to travel between the states, isn't it, is a right. The freedom for people to do what they want. You can't start interfering with that. And so you'll get a lot of people who would very vehemently argue for states' rights, who would then attack these sanctuary states for doing what they're doing. Well, it's like, surely they have a right to do that then, if it's down to state rights, isn't it? During the debate on Dobbs, Justice Kavanaugh made an interesting comment here. So what was it he said?
He did. So Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence basically affirmed what's known as the constitutional right to interstate travel. And he stated that states cannot prevent residents from crossing state lines to seek abortion care elsewhere. So, if you went from Kansas to Colorado, something like that. And while the Constitution doesn't explicitly protect this right, the Supreme Court has recognized it in various rulings as far back as actually 1867, so far predating any kind of abortion stuff here. But it really remains this kind of crucial safeguard for access, especially as more women are traveling out of their states to get care.
It's fascinating, isn't it? A fascinating legal landscape. All these things that you didn't even consider before, all of a sudden popping out of the woodwork with the Dobbs ruling. So what about these abortion trafficking laws? What are all these about?
Yeah, recently, some states have begun focusing on restricting abortion-related travel, and particularly their bills are concerning minors. So Idaho really led the way with this in April of last year, 2023, with its abortion trafficking law, which criminalizes adults who assist unemancipated minors in obtaining an abortion without parental consent. So again, we're really getting into, the legal jargon there. You have to be not emancipated. Your parents have to have not said yes. So, inherently it's that your parent is not helping you do this. It's somebody else. But it's actually even a problem within Idaho's borders. So leaving Idaho or within Idaho. And this includes actions like recruiting, harboring, or transporting a minor. And if caught, violators could face 2 to 5 years in prison.
Wow, that is quite a lot, actually. I mean, it's normal with abortion laws that you have restrictions for minors. So girls under the age of 18 seeking an abortion will usually need some kind of parental permission and things, and that can often be sort of problematic. But you can sort of understand it, really. But sending people to prison for 2 to 5 years for driving them in a car to the abortion center or something, I presume, would fall under that. That's pretty harsh. So what about Tennessee? Didn't they do something similar?
They sure did. So Tennessee passed similar legislation, also criminalizing transporting or assisting a minor in obtaining an abortion without parental parental consent. And their law allows for wrongful death suits in certain cases, which is creating this new offense called abortion trafficking of a minor, which again, a lot of these words of the trafficking over interstate lines, which I think is also kind of a call to a big problem also of human trafficking. So it's kind of, getting those types of titles in that are really hitting home for some people. And the goals of all of these seem to be tightening parental consent laws and creating legal consequences for adults who help minors in accessing abortion care.
It sounds like quite a dangerous trend, really, particularly when you're talking about trafficking within the US. So trafficking laws will generally be between one country and another, not between states within a country. So it could be problematic, really. And are laws like this popping up elsewhere? What about places like Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma?
Yeah, they are. So some of these states have proposed these laws, but they didn't pass in the most recent legislative sessions. And again, it's this push to criminalize assisting minors with out-of-state abortions. And these states are some of the places in the country that have the most restrictive abortive care of anyone, of minors or adults. And it's really concerning to see states trying to enforce this parental consent by restricting interstate movement. And, there's a lot going on here other than just the abortion factor of it.
Yes, it is really. Okay, so that's one side of the argument now. So let's move to talk about medication abortions, which have become a major focal point in the post-Roe landscape. And this is where things start to diverge a little bit from historical precedents, because of course this is a relatively new thing that you can actually get an abortion through medication. So how does this work, and what are the kind of arguments around it?
Yeah, this is something that we're seeing a lot more about, and these medication abortions involve using mifepristone and misoprostol, which are now accounting for over half of the U.S. abortions. And a lot of this does have to do with interstate travel, access to abortion, and other things like that. And some conservative states are pushing to restrict access by banning mailing of abortion pills, because this has been something that's been more and more common by organizations who are trying to help people get access to abortions, who are maybe living in states and in areas where it's really hard to get them, or they want to require in-person doctor's visits in order to get one of the pills. Progressive states, on the other hand, are working to protect telemedicine services to ensure that these pills can be mailed.
Yes, and there are sort of ongoing legal battles as well, right? So the case I mentioned earlier in the UK was about this, of course. There are all sorts of safeguards in place to protect women if they go into a clinic, to make sure that everything's carried out properly. But if you're just mailing a pill to someone, and there's no way you can guarantee they take it when they're supposed to take it, and that's what happened in the UK. The woman actually held onto the pill, changed her mind later on, and took the pill after the actual safe date. And so it is important that there are safeguards on these things, but obviously banning mailing stuff through the post again seems to be rather as a sort of an extreme measure to go to. So what exactly are the legal battles around this?
Yeah, so there is a lot of legal challenges, and one of the biggest ones is the FDA's approval of mifepristone, with some states trying to limit its availability. And these legal battles complicate the access to medication abortions, and they potentially affect how and where these bills can be dispensed across the country. And there's been all of these decisions back and forth, and states' attorney generals relaunching suits and all of this stuff, but it's really, quite a mess.
Yeah, it seems like a real mess. So I heard about the Louisiana Catherine and Josephine Herring Act. Can you fill us in on what that's all about?
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting legislation. It's kind of a new type of legislation that we're seeing within this abortion debate that is very different from kind of the age-old back and forth that we usually see. And in it, Louisiana is seeking to classify these two abortion drugs as controlled dangerous substances. And it's faced a lot of backlash from medical experts and also the Biden administration, as no other state regulates these drugs in such a manner. And initially, the bill also aimed to penalize administering these drugs without consent, but some amendments escalated its restrictions dramatically and made the possession of these medications without prescriptions punishable by very severe penalties.
Wow, that seems a bit extreme. extreme. It's like having large amounts of heroin or something. So what are the implications for healthcare providers and patients in Louisiana?
Yeah, this legislation has sparked widespread opposition among healthcare providers who argue that these two drugs pose no public health risk. And critics warn that this kind of legislation could lead to really invasive state oversight of reproductive health care, more so than they're already seeing. And it also raises significant concerns about access, especially for women in rural or kind of restrictive states who rely on medication abortions for safe early care.
True. Okay, well, some incredible insights there, Sarah. So thanks very much. It seems like we're navigating a really complex web of legal challenges, healthcare access issues, and all of these sort of grey areas that fall under the broader question about whether women should have access to abortion or not. So as we wrap up, then, what should listeners really take away from all of this?
Yeah, so one thing that I think listeners should recognize is that the landscape of abortion laws is rapidly changing and is really heavily influenced by state politics, mostly because that's what it has to be now. But for some, crossing state lines has become essential for accessing this care, while others, face heightened legal risks. And it's really a kind of scary, weird time to be somebody that can get pregnant and would want to be seeking care like this. And it's really crucial that we stay informed and we keep listening to these stories of these kind of really horrific unintended consequences from some of these bills so that we can really advocate for better protections as these states continue to kind of figure out what their legislative landscape looks like in the post-Roe era, whether that's, readdressing some of their trigger bans or other things like that. But there's a lot going on here and it is exhausting. We're exhausted. It's election day. I'm so sleepy and tired and fed up of living in this. But this is one of those things where the fight for it is now. And the more engaged that we can be, the more we can shape the reproductive health care in the US.
Absolutely. And of course, that's what Bill Track 50 is here for, to help you make sense of all this complex legislation, to follow it and to advocate it. And obviously, the most crucial thing is to vote. Vote for those politicians who support your view on this issue, because it is a really important one. Obviously, not in the current presidential election, because by the time you see this, that'll all be done and dusted, but certainly in elections to come. Thanks, Sarah. That's all we have for today on Beyond the Bill Number. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the important issues affecting our society, regardless of who the new president will be.
Yes, thanks everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have anything you'd like us to cover, comment below.